There is a smell that houses get. It is not a bad smell, and it is not a hospital smell. And if you have never been in a house that has it, you will not recognize it, and if you have, you already know the one I mean. It is warm plastic, mostly, tubing that has been running for months. Under that there is disinfectant wipes, and under that there is something faintly sweet that has nothing to do with food. There is the tin and saline smell that comes off a nebulizer about 90 seconds after it starts. And there is a laundry smell that is slightly wrong, because the sheets are being changed more often than sheets are supposed to be changed, and nobody in the house has the energy to fully dry anything. That is the smell of a room where somebody is dying at home. Nurses can walk into a front hall and tell you roughly how long a person has left before they have seen the person. I am not exaggerating. It is a real thing. I'm Nathan. There is a house on Garriott Street in Wheelock, Ohio that smelled exactly like that for 13 months. And nobody in it was dying. I want to be careful about how I say the next part, because it is the whole story, and I do not want to hand it to you in the first minute. So here is only this. The man who bought that house, whose name is on the note, whose name is on the deed, who worked nights so it could be paid for, walked out of it in October, with his belongings in contractor bags on the driveway, and a sentence in his ear that I have not been able to stop thinking about since I first read the file. And the person who explained to him what had actually been happening in his own front room was 6 years old, and she did it in a whisper, holding his hand, standing on a driveway in her socks. Lawson Barlowe was 37 years old, and he was a hospice nurse. I want to spend a minute on that job because almost nobody understands it, and it is the engine of everything that follows. A hospice nurse is not a hospital nurse. There is no monitor, no code team, no crash cart, no 17 other people down the hall. You drive to a house, at night, alone, and in that house there is a person who is going to die within days or weeks, and your entire job is to make sure that happens as comfortably and as unfrightened as it is possible to arrange. You manage pain. You manage breath. You manage the terror that arrives at 3 in the morning in people who were fine at 9. And you manage the family, which is most of it. Lawson had been doing it for 13 years, all of them on nights, and by his own count he had been in the room or in the house for a little over 400 deaths. 400 families, seen at the exact hour when they cannot pretend anymore. That does something to a person. What it did to Lawson was make him extremely good at reading a household. Not in a mystical way, in the way a roofer can tell you where the water is getting in. He could walk into a kitchen at 1 in the morning and know which of the 3 adult children had been doing all the work, which one was going to make a scene at the funeral, which one had already, quietly, in his own head, spent the money. He could tell you which spouse was going to fall apart and which one was going to be fine in an unsettling way. He had watched a woman hold her husband's hand for 9 hours, and he had watched a man check his phone twice during his mother's last breath. He never said any of it out loud. That was not the job. The job was the pain, and the breath, and the fear. I want to give you one night of his working life, because you need it later. In the last week of that October, when everything in this story had already gone wrong for him, Lawson was carrying a patient named Margot Updegraff, who was 84 and had metastatic disease in her liver and about 9 days left, and who lived with her daughter in a ranch house out past the fairgrounds. Margot was frightened of the nights. A lot of people are. The medical name for what happens is terminal restlessness, and the human description of it is that at about 2 in the morning, the body understands what is happening before the mind agrees to, and the person becomes agitated in a way that has no content, no thought behind it, just a body that will not lie still. The daughter, who was 52 and had not slept properly in 5 weeks, met him at the door every night with her hands already shaking. And what Lawson did, every night for 9 nights, was sit down first, not go to the bedroom. Sit down at the kitchen table for 4 minutes and let the daughter tell him something that had nothing to do with her mother, about a coworker, about a car, about a neighbor's dog, and then go and do the medicine. That is not a trick, and it is not therapy. It is the job. The person who is dying has a body you can manage. The person who is not dying is the one nobody is managing, and she is the one who will still be in that house in 6 months. Lawson Barlowe was extremely, professionally good at seeing the person nobody was managing. He did not see it in his own kitchen for 13 months, and I do not think that is irony. I think that is how it always goes. The roofer's roof leaks. The dentist kid has cavities. You do not turn the instrument on your own house, because your own house is not a case, it is where you sleep. He met Marley Pickerel when he was 26 and she was 22 and working the desk at a dialysis clinic, and they were married inside a year. I should give you Marley properly, because the easy version of this story makes her a monster in the last act and she is not. Quite. And the story is worse if she is. Marley Pickerel had grown up in 9 towns and had never once, in her whole childhood, lived in a place her family owned. Her father is a blank. He left when she was 2 and there is no photograph of him in existence that she has ever seen. She had been, at various points between the ages of 9 and 17, the person who did the laundry, the person who talked to landlords, and the person who lied to a school secretary about which address they were living at. When Lawson met her, she was flinchy about money in a very specific way. She never wanted to know the balance. She would rather not be told. He found that endearing for about 4 years and worrying for about 10. And she was funny. Everybody who knew them before says the same thing, unprompted, that Marley was the funny one, the one who made the room, and that Lawson, who is quiet, mostly watched her do it and looked pleased. Whatever went wrong in that house did not go wrong because she was cold. It went wrong because a woman who had spent her entire childhood being handled by her mother got handled by her mother one more time, at 34, in a front room, over a fortnight in June, and did not have whatever it is that other people have that lets them say no to that. Juniper came 5 years later, and she was, by every account including the ones from people who ended up testifying against her mother, a delightful child, watchful, verbal, a little serious, the kind of 6-year-old who repeats things she has heard adults say with the intonation exactly preserved. The money was the ordinary kind of tight. Hospice nurses are not paid well, and nights paid a differential that made the difference between tight and impossible. By the time Juniper was in kindergarten, they had been renting the same duplex for 7 years, and the rent had gone up twice, and they started looking at houses. And that is where the first strange thing sits, and it did not look strange at all at the time. They could not get a mortgage together. Marley's credit was destroyed, not damaged, destroyed. A repossessed car, 2 charged-off cards, a medical collection and, oddly, a utility account in her name at an address in a town she said she had never lived in. Every one of those was opened between the ages of 18 and 20. She told Lawson, once, early, in a flat voice, that her mother had used her name for some things when she was young and that she did not want to talk about it. And he did what a decent man does, which was never bring it up again. Years later, when a forensic accountant working for the state pulled every account ever opened in Marley Pickerel's name, the picture was uglier than used her name for some things. There were 9 accounts opened between her 18th and 20th birthdays, across the Midwest. The signatures were not hers, and the handwriting expert who compared them to Eunice's known writing gave the strongest opinion that discipline allows. The utility account at the address in a town Marley said she had never lived in was in a rented house in Greene County, Indiana. It was opened in 2008. The name on the lease was Hamlin Poindexter. Nobody had ever put those things beside each other, because there was no reason to. A woman's daughter's ruined credit is a sad private thing. It is not evidence of anything. It is just the ordinary damage that ordinary bad mothers do. So the loan was written in his name alone. His income, his score, his signature. The deed said Lawson Barlowe, a married man, as his sole and separate property, because that is what the title company does when only one spouse is on the note. The house was on Garriott Street, 4 bedrooms, brown brick, a maple in front, and it cost $219,000. And the day they closed, he drove there on his own before his shift and sat on the front step for 20 minutes. 7 weeks later, Eunice Pickerel had a fall and broke her hip. I need to introduce Eunice properly here, and I am going to do it the way Lawson knew her for a decade, which is to say, barely, and warmly, and at a distance. Eunice Pickerel was small, and quick, and funny in a dry way that landed better than you expected. She remembered things about you. That is her actual, genuine, non-fraudulent talent, and every single person who ever met her says it. She remembered. She would ask about your sister's surgery 8 months later, by name, and mean it. She sent cards. She was, For the entire 10 years Lawson knew her before she moved in, a slightly difficult but fundamentally beloved presence at holidays, who would sit at the end of the table and say something faintly outrageous, and then look pleased with herself. She had no money at all. She had never had any. She had worked, on and off, in the kind of jobs that do not have a title, a bakery counter, a motel desk, a school kitchen. She had lived in 11 places since 2009 and had never held a lease longer than 2 years. And she had buried 2 husbands, which Lawson knew, and which is a fact that means absolutely nothing on its own. A great many people have buried 2 husbands. Eunice was 64. She had advanced chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, which is a real, serious, progressive illness. I want to be clear about that, because the temptation with this story is to decide she faked everything, and she did not. Eunice was genuinely sick. That is exactly what made her so difficult to see. She came to Garriott Street to recover from the hip. 8 weeks, everyone said. Marley's brother Brady drove the van. Here is what a hospice nurse would have noticed in another family's house, and did not notice in his own. Within a month, there was a hospital bed in the front room. Not a rented recliner, a full electric bed, on the main floor, in the room with the front window, which meant the room everybody had to pass through. There was an oxygen concentrator, which is a machine roughly the size of a suitcase that runs constantly and makes a rhythmic sound that a household stops hearing in about a week and never stops feeling. There was a nebulizer on the side table. There was a commode. There were the sheets and the wipes and the warm plastic tubing. By Christmas, that room was the center of the house, and every conversation in that house passed through a woman lying in a bed in the middle of it. Lawson set it up himself. Of course he did. He was the one who knew where to source a bed and how to angle it away from the draught and how to arrange the tubing so nobody trips. He did it out of love and out of competence, and it took him about a day and a half. He had furnished, in his own front room, at his own expense, the exact stage he had watched 400 families perform on. There is a specific move that Lawson identified afterwards, when he went back over it, and it happened in the first fortnight, and it is so small that writing it down makes it sound like nothing. Eunice asked where the medicines were kept. Not his medicines. The household's. Juniper's amoxicillin, the antihistamines, the paracetamol, the thermometer. She asked because she was a woman recovering from a broken hip who might need something in the night and did not want to wake anybody. And it was such an obviously reasonable question that Lawson answered it in 4 seconds while carrying a laundry basket. Bathroom cabinet, upstairs hall, second shelf. I have thought about that exchange more than almost anything else in this file. It is not sinister. There is no version of it that a reasonable man refuses to answer. It is a 64-year-old woman with a walker asking where the aspirin is. That is the entire method. That is it. The method is not poison, and it is not planning. The method is being the kind of person that a decent man answers reasonable questions for, in his own house, for 13 months, while carrying a laundry basket. The 8 weeks became 5 months, and then the hip healed and nobody mentioned leaving, and then it was 13 months. I want to give you the year, because it is a slow year and the shape of it matters. Lawson worked 7 nights out of 14, 7 in the evening to 7 in the morning. He came home at 7:30 and slept from 8 to 3. That is a household where a man is asleep during the hours his family is awake, and awake in a car during the hours they are asleep. It is a lonely schedule even when nothing is wrong. In February, he hurt his back. It happened the way it always happens, which is not dramatically. A 240-pound man in a bedroom that was too small, no lift, a daughter who could not physically help, and Lawson took the weight badly at an angle. He finished the shift. He always finished the shift. What he had, afterward, was a lumbar strain that never entirely resolved and a prescription for lidocaine patches, the over-the-counter strength ones you stick on your lower back at night that numb the skin and do nothing else. Ordinary, harmless, and he wore one most nights for the next 3 years. Juniper called them his stickers. She was 5 when she named them, and she called them that from then on. In April, Brady Pickerel moved into the basement. Brady was 30, had a Class B license he had let lapse, and was between things in a way that had lasted a decade. Nobody asked Lawson. He came home from a shift, and there was a mattress and a television. In May, there was an argument that nobody thought about again until a prosecutor put it in front of a jury. Lawson came home off a night at 7:30, and Juniper was at the kitchen table, and Marley was standing at the sink, and Marley said, without turning around, that her mother had asked whether Lawson had ever been tested for sleep apnea. Because of the snoring. Because he slept so heavily during the day. Because, and this is the phrase Marley repeated, in Eunice's cadence, and which Marley herself would later be asked about on the stand. Because a man who sleeps like that and doesn't wake up for anything ought to get himself looked at. Lawson laughed and said he slept like that because he worked 12-hour nights, and that was the end of it. It is not a sinister sentence. It is a caring sentence. That is the whole point of her. Every single thing this woman ever said was a caring sentence, and about a quarter of them were also a measurement. In June, Marley stopped complaining about her mother. Lawson noticed that and felt guilty for noticing it, because what kind of man is disappointed that his wife has stopped complaining? But it had been constant for a decade. Marley's relationship with Eunice was a running low-grade war, and then, over about a fortnight, it simply stopped. They became close. They spent evenings in the front room with the door shut and the concentrator running. In July, Juniper was moved. She had been in the small bedroom at the top of the stairs, next to her parents. In July, she was moved to the back bedroom over the kitchen, at the other end of the landing, because of her grandmother's machine, which nobody could hear on the second floor at all. Juniper cried about it for a week, and Lawson, who was working 7 nights out of 14, and who was not thinking clearly about anything, told her that big girls get the big room, and she stopped crying, and he felt like a father who had handled something well. A 6-year-old sleeping at the far end of a landing does not hear an adult walking to a bathroom cabinet at 2 in the morning. She heard it anyway, on the 16th of October, because she had a bad dream and came looking for her mother, and her mother was not in her mother's room. And a 6-year-old standing on a dark landing looking for one adult and finding a different one, in the bathroom, with the light on and a box in her hand, is a witness that nobody in that house had planned for. In August, Marley bought a pair of black shoes. That is a strange sentence, and it sat in Lawson's head for a year afterward without meaning anything, and then it meant everything. She bought them at a store 2 towns over, and she did not wear them, and when he asked, she said they were for a funeral, and he said whose, and she said nobody's, just to have. And in September, Gentry Hodgins came to the kitchen table. Hodgins was a life insurance agent out of Van Dusen County who had been doing it for 26 years and who had never, as far as anybody could establish afterward, done a single dishonest thing. He sat at Lawson's kitchen table with a folder and a laptop because Eunice had asked him to come. For the girls, she said, and she said it from the doorway with the cannula in her nose, and there is not a man alive who argues with that. What Lawson signed that evening, over about 70 minutes, was 7 documents. A term life policy on his own life, $750,000, 20-year level term, medically underwritten, primary beneficiary, Marley Barlowe, contingent beneficiary, Eunice Pickerel, an accelerated death benefit rider, a disability waiver, and, because Hodgins was thorough, and because a house held in one spouse's sole name is a genuine problem when that spouse dies, a transfer on death designation on the deed, naming Marley, prepared and recorded by a title office the following Tuesday. Lawson has said since, more than once, that the thing he cannot forgive himself for is not that he signed. It is that he was pleased with himself while he did it. He was 37, he had a house and a daughter and a back that hurt, and he had just made his family safe. He had, in one evening, at his own kitchen table, made himself worth $750,000 dead and nothing at all alive. The 19th of October was a Saturday, and Lawson came off a 12-hour night at 8:10 in the morning. He knew before he had fully turned into the street, because there were things on the driveway. Not thrown, that is the detail he keeps returning to. Packed. 5 black contractor bags, tied. 2 plastic totes. His work boots side by side on the top of a tote. Laces tucked in. Somebody had folded his things. Marley was on the porch. Eunice was in the doorway behind her, standing up, without the cannula, in a cardigan, holding the frame. His key did not turn. They had changed the locks on Thursday. He found that out later. Thursday, 2 days before, which means for 2 nights he had come home and gone to bed in a house whose locks had already been changed by somebody who was waiting for the right morning. There was a version of this where he shouted. There is a version where he put a shoulder to his own front door, and it was his front door, his name on the deed, his name on the note, his signature on 31 pieces of paper at a closing table, and no court on earth would have blamed him for standing on that porch. He did not. Partly because he was a man who had spent 13 years being calm in rooms where everybody else could not be, and partly because Juniper was standing at the front window. He said, "What is this?" And Marley said the thing she had clearly practiced, because it came out too even. "This isn't working. You're never here. We need the house." And then Eunice, from the doorway, in a voice that carried further than it should have from a woman with advanced Copt, said the sentence that 3 neighbors heard, and 2 of them testified to. "You've served your purpose. Leave." He stood there for a while. Then he put the bags in the car because there was nothing else to do with them, and he sat in the driver's seat with the door open and his feet still on the driveway, and he cried, which he had not done in front of anybody since he was 19, and the front door opened, and Juniper came out, in socks, down the driveway, fast, and Marley shouted her name once and did not follow. She got hold of 2 of his fingers, which is how small children hold a hand, and she put her mouth near his ear, and she said, "Daddy, actually," and then she said the rest of it, and this is the part I want you to hear exactly, because a 6-year-old cannot invent this, and a grown-up cannot fake a 6-year-old inventing it. She said, "Don't use your stickers. Grandma took yours out and put different ones in. She did it in the bathroom, and she said don't tell, and I said okay, but I'm telling." And then she said, because she was 6, "Is that okay?" He asked her one question, and it was the right one, and he asked it in the voice he uses at 2 in the morning with frightened people, because that is the only voice he had left. He said, "When?" And Juniper said, "The night I had the bad dream." And then she said the detail that ended up in a courtroom 19 months later, which is that Grandma had 2 boxes, 1 in each hand, and she was doing this. And the child made a small shuffling motion with both hands, back and forth, which is precisely what a person does when they are swapping the contents of 2 identical cardboard boxes. Then Marley came down the driveway and took her back inside, and did not look at him, and the door closed. He got to a motel on Route 9 by 9:30 in the morning, and he sat on the end of the bed with his kit bag in front of him for a long time before he opened it. Inside was a cardboard box of lidocaine patches. He had bought it at the pharmacy on Vine, and he could tell you the day he bought it. There were 9 patches left in a box that held 12. 6 of them were lidocaine. 3 of them were not. Now, here is the thing that makes this story what it is. 99 people out of 100 open that box and see 9 identical white squares in 9 identical foil pouches. Lawson Barlowe was the 100th. He had opened, applied, documented, and disposed of transdermal patches something in the region of 6,000 times. He knew the pouches the way a mechanic knows bolt heads. The 3 were fentanyl, 75 micrograms an hour. He knew it from the pouch printing before he ever opened one. And when he did open one, under the motel lamp, he knew it from the gel reservoir and the bevel of the corner. I want to explain, without being lurid, what that is. A fentanyl transdermal patch is a completely legitimate medicine, and Lawson put them on people every week. It delivers a continuous dose through the skin over 72 hours. It is prescribed to patients who are already opioid tolerant, because in a person who is not, a 75 microgram patch is not a strong painkiller. It is a lethal dose delivered slowly over a night, and the specific way it kills is that it quietly turns down the part of the brainstem that tells you to breathe, and you do not wake up and fight it, because you are asleep, and the whole point of it is that you stay asleep, on the lower back, at night. On a 37-year-old man who had never taken an opioid in his life, and who worked 12-hour nights and slept like the dead from 8 in the morning, and when they found him, this is the part that made him put the box down and walk outside into a motel parking lot at 10 in the morning. When they found him, he would be a hospice nurse. A man with daily access to a locked box of exactly this drug. A man in the middle of a marital separation, thrown out of his house, living in a motel, with a bad back and a documented lumbar injury. Nobody investigates that. Everybody nods at that. There is a whole category of death that the county coroner clears in 11 minutes, and he had been placed, carefully, deliberately, inside it. He did not sleep that night or the next one. I want to sit in that motel room for a second, because everybody skips it and it is where the story actually turns. Here is a man who has spent 13 years being the person other people call when the worst thing is happening. He has driven to 200 houses at 3 in the morning. He is, in a very real sense, professionally unshockable. He has cleaned things, and held things, and told a 19-year-old that her father had about an hour, and then gone out to his car and driven to the next house. And what he had in that motel room was the specific horror of running the film backwards. Because he did that. Nurses do that. He sat there and he counted the nights. 13 nights since the box was opened, and on 8 of them he had worn a patch, and every single one of those 8 had been a lidocaine one, and there is no reason for that except arithmetic. 9 left in a box of 12. 3 of them fentanyl. He had been pulling from a box that was a third loaded, at random, in the dark, 8 times. He worked out the odds on the motel notepad, which is a horrible thing to do, and which he could not stop doing. He also understood, sitting there, exactly why he was still alive. And it was not luck, and it was not God. It was that the swap had happened on the 16th, and he had been thrown out on the 19th. 3 nights. She had done it 72 hours too early, because she had needed him out of the house before it happened, and she had needed the locks changed and the bags packed on a specific Saturday, and the 2 halves of the plan had not quite fitted together. He was alive because a schedule slipped. He did the obvious things, in the obvious order, and they nearly finished him. On the Monday, he took the box to the Van Dusen County Sheriff's Office and asked for an investigator, and he got Sergeant Jonelle Burkholtz, who is by every account a good one. 19 years, patient, not a cynic. She listened for 50 minutes and took the box into evidence and asked all the right questions, and then she put her pen down and told him the truth, which is what a good investigator does, even when it is not what anybody wants. She said, "Mr. Barlowe, I believe you're frightened. Now hear what you just brought me. You are a hospice nurse. You have handed me 3 diverted fentanyl patches, in your own bag, from your own box, that you brought in yourself. Your only witness is your 6-year-old daughter, who lives with the woman you are accusing, and whose mother will have a therapist in front of a judge inside a week, saying the child was coached by her father. And if I open a file today, the first thing that happens is not that your mother-in-law gets arrested. The first thing that happens is that the state nursing board gets a mandatory notification that a hospice nurse is in possession of unaccounted for Schedule II narcotics. She let that sit. Then she said, I'll take the box. I'll test it, but I need you to understand what I'm holding. On the Tuesday, at the family center on 9th Street, he had his first supervised visit. Supervised visitation, if you have never seen it, happens in a room with a low table and a bin of donated toys and a woman with a clipboard sitting in the corner who is not allowed to talk to you. It lasts an hour. There is a sign on the wall about not discussing the case with the child. Juniper came in and did not run to him, because she had already learned, in 4 days, that there was a way you were supposed to behave in this room. She sat down and she colored, and she asked him whether the motel had a pool, and he said no, and she said that was a shame, and they discussed for a while whether a motel without a pool was really a motel. At 50 minutes, she said, without looking up from the paper, "Are you mad at me?" And he said no, and she said, "Mom is." The woman with the clipboard wrote something down. Lawson said nothing at all about it, because he was not allowed to, and because, and this is a thing he said later that I found harder to hear than anything else in the file, because he could not risk the visits. He was a man who had been told by an investigator that his only witness was a coached child, and the fastest way to make that true was to talk to her about it. So he asked her what color the shame motel should be, and she said green, and they did that for 10 minutes, and then it was over. On the Wednesday, he sat in an office with an attorney called Win Fonestock, who confirmed that the house was legally his, that the deed and the note were in his sole name, and that Marley had no more right to change those locks than a stranger. And then Fonestock gave him the second half. Getting them out meant an ejectment action, weeks, possibly months, and at the end of it, a sheriff's deputy putting his wife, his mother-in-law, and his 6-year-old daughter's belongings on the same driveway his had been on, with photographs, in front of the same 3 neighbors. And by the way, Fonestock said, she filed for a protective order on Monday. She had, Marley's petition said he had come to the house, refused to leave, shouted, and frightened the child. 2 of those 3 things were technically true. The order was granted ex parte, as they almost always are, and it kept him off Garriott Street, and reduced his contact with his daughter to supervised visits at a family center on Thursdays. So by the 9th day he had lost his house, his daughter, his standing, and every ordinary door was closed, and the only thing he had was 3 foil pouches in an evidence bag in a building he could not walk into and demand anything from. And this is where he stopped being a victim, and it happened because of the job. He sat in a motel room on Route 9, and he did the thing he does at the start of every shift. He took a report. A hospice shift report is a specific discipline. You do not describe how a patient seems. You state what changed, when, and in what order, and you do not editorialize, because the next nurse needs facts. So Lawson took a legal pad and he reported out the last 13 months of his own house, the way he would report out a stranger's. Month 1, a hospital bed installed in the front room, main floor, high traffic. Month 2, an oxygen concentrator, running continuously, ambient noise established. Month 3, patient's mobility publicly worse. Privately, patient walked to the mailbox on a day she believed the house was empty. Month 5, hip healed, no discussion of discharge. Month 6, secondary adult male moved into the lower level, no consultation with the homeowner. Month 8, primary caregiver's daughter ceased all conflict with patient, relationship inverted inside a fortnight. Month 10, homeowner sustained lumbar injury at work, topical analgesic introduced into the household, storage location, bathroom cabinet, unsecured. Month 11, spouse purchased funeral clothing with no funeral. Month 12, life insurance placed on the homeowner at the patient's initiation, transfer on death designation recorded on the deed. Month 13, locks changed, homeowner removed from the property. He looked at that page for a long time, because when you write it in that order, with the dates, it stops being a family and starts being a procedure. Everything is in sequence. Nothing is out of order. The stage was built first, and then the audience was recruited, and then the medicine arrived, and then the money was arranged, and then the man was moved somewhere he could die alone. And a hospice nurse knows one more thing that a police officer does not, which is what it looks like when a household is waiting for a death. He had seen it 400 times. The particular quiet, the way people start using the past tense a little early, the way somebody buys the shoes. That house had been waiting for a death for months. He had been sleeping in it. Then he did the other thing a nurse does, which is check the history. You cannot look up Eunice Pickerel and find anything, because Eunice Pickerel had been 3 women. Lawson did not find that by investigating her. He found it because he was looking at Brady, who was the weakest thing in the house, and the only one who might talk, and Brady's license. Lawson had seen it 100 times on the kitchen counter, said Brady Poindexter. Poindexter, a surname you can actually search. Hamlin Poindexter died in Greene County, Indiana, in 2009. 51 years old. The obituary is 9 lines long and says he died at home after a brief illness and was survived by his wife Eunice and his son Brady, aged 13. There was no autopsy. The manner of death on the certificate is natural, the cause a cardiac event, and it was signed by a family physician who had seen him twice that year. Eunice collected $180,000 from a credit union policy, sold the house, and left the state. Farley Nightingale died in Hardin County, Kentucky in 2017. 58. A guardrail installer with a back injury from a fall in 2015, and a prescription he had filled exactly once. The manner of death is accident, the cause acute fentanyl toxicity, and the file contains a 2-paragraph narrative that says the decedent had a history of chronic pain and was found in a rented room. He and Eunice had been married for 23 months. The policy paid $400,000. He was cremated 8 days later. There was a sister. Her name is Rena Poindexter. She is 67. She lives 40 minutes from where her brother died, and she had been telling anybody who would listen for 17 years that there were no patches in that house on the Tuesday, and there were patches in that house on the Thursday. Lawson called her on a Sunday afternoon from a motel parking lot. She did not cry. She said, "I wondered who was going to call." Then she said, "What year are you?" He drove to Indiana on a Saturday and sat in Rena Poindexter's kitchen for 5 hours. She is a retired school bus driver with a bad knee and a great deal of dignity, and she had been treated for 17 years as a woman with a grudge, which is what happens to sisters. She had gone to the sheriff's office in 2009 and been listened to politely. She had written to the prosecutor twice. She had a folder. Everybody in a story like this has a folder, and the folder was thin and sad and contained mostly copies of things she had sent to people who never wrote back. What she had that mattered was not in the folder. She said, "Hamlin didn't hold with pills." She said it 3 times over 5 hours, in slightly different ways, because it was the thing she needed a stranger to believe. Her brother had thrown his back out on a truck in 2006 and had refused anything stronger than ibuprofen for a decade because their father had died an alcoholic in a rented room in 1988, and Hamlin had made a decision about himself when he was 19 and never once bent it. She said, "I was in that house on the Tuesday. There was nothing in that bathroom but Tylenol and her inhalers. I looked because I was looking for the Tylenol. And on the Thursday morning, when the county came, there was a prescription bottle on the nightstand with a month's worth in it, in her brother's name, from a clinic 30 miles the wrong way." Nobody had ever asked her about the Tuesday. Not once, in 17 years. Every conversation she had ever had with an official person had been about whether she had proof, and she had said, every time, that she had been in the house on the Tuesday, and every time it had been written down as the opinion of a grieving sister. Lawson listened to her the way he listens to a daughter at a kitchen table at 2 in the morning, which is to say he did not once say the word evidence. When he left, she walked him to the car and said, "He was funny. Nobody said that about him in 17 years. Everybody says he was sad." She had assumed there were others. There were. Now, what Lawson did with all of that is the reason I picked this story, and I want you to watch it, because it is the least obvious move available, and it is the only one that could have worked. He could not prove 2009. He could not prove 2017. The man was ashes. He could not get 2026 charged, because the only physical evidence was in his own bag and pointed at him. Every door that led backwards was closed. So he stopped trying to prove what had happened, and he went to work on what was going to happen. He understood 2 things about the machine he was inside. The first is that the machine ran on a number, $750,000, payable on his death, to his wife, with her mother behind her. The second is that the machine required him to die in a specific way, in a specific kind of place, alone, in a rented room, with a bad back, and a story that wrote itself. He decided to take away the first one and hand them the second one. On the Tuesday, he drove to the Van Dusen Life and Casualty office and asked for the policy service desk, and he did the flattest, least dramatic thing in this entire story. He was the owner of that policy, not Marley. Marley was the beneficiary, which sounds like power and is not. A beneficiary has no rights at all while the insured is alive. The owner controls everything, and the owner was Lawson. He filed a beneficiary change, not a normal one. He named the charitable foundation of the hospice he worked for, and he executed it as an irrevocable designation, which means the change cannot be undone, not by his wife, not by a court in a divorce, and not by him. He signed away his own ability to change his mind, in front of a notary, on a Tuesday afternoon, in a strip mall office next to a nail salon. Then he drove to Fahnestock's office and revoked the transfer on death designation on the deed, and recorded a new one naming a trust for Juniper with Fahnestock as independent trustee. He got certified copies of both. He paid $19, and then he did the part that scared him. He had Fahnestock schedule a mediation. Not a hearing, a normal, dull, court-annexed divorce mediation in a conference room with both attorneys, a neutral mediator taking notes, and everybody's name on an attendance sheet. Marley came. Marley's attorney came. And Eunice came, because Eunice always came, and because she was listed as a household member with an interest in the residence. 20 minutes in, Lawson slid 2 certified copies across the table. He said, and the mediator's notes have it nearly verbatim. As of Tuesday afternoon, the policy on my life is irrevocably assigned to a charity. Nobody in this room can change that, including me. The transfer on death on the house is revoked. If I die, the house goes to a trust for my daughter with an independent trustee. I have no other assets. I have $4,000 and a Honda. Then he looked at Eunice and said, as of Tuesday, I am worth nothing to either of you, alive or dead. Now, can we talk about the parenting schedule? Marley's attorney asked for a recess, and Lawson said the last thing, which was the trap, and which he had rehearsed in a motel bathroom until he could say it flatly. He said he had taken a room above a garage on Route 9, number 19, outside stairs, no neighbors on that side, and he gave the address out loud so the mediator would write it down, and he said, for service of process. Then he went to Sergeant Burkholtz. He did not accuse anybody. He put 3 things on her desk: the certified irrevocable assignment, the mediator's summary, and a single sheet with 2 names, 2 counties and 2 dates: Greene County, Indiana, 2009, Hardin County, Kentucky, 2017. And he said, I am not asking you to believe me about the past. I am telling you that as of last Tuesday, there is no money in my death. If something happens to me in the next 90 days, it will be the first time in 19 years that this woman has done it for nothing. That is the only version of this you can actually use. Burkholtz read the assignment twice. Then she picked up her phone and called Indiana. 9 days. That is how long it took. And the 9 days are the thing I cannot get past. Because a rational person does not do this. A rational person, told in a conference room in front of a mediator and 2 attorneys that the money is irrevocably gone, walks away and finds another mark. Eunice Pickerel had walked away before. She had been patient for 19 years. But this had stopped being about money somewhere around the second husband, if it ever was. And the mediation had done something to her that nobody had done since 2009. It had taken something out of her hands in a room where she could not perform being sick, in front of people who had written it down. Burkholtz did it properly, which took the 9 days. She got the Indiana file and the Kentucky file. She got the pharmacy record from the walk-in clinic in Hardin County that had filled a single prescription for Farley Nightingale in 2017, and the surveillance still from that clinic, which nobody had ever pulled because nobody had ever asked, and which shows a small woman in a cardigan standing at the counter while a large man sits in a chair by the door with his eyes shut. And she did the thing that made the case, which cost nothing and took an afternoon. She put a camera on the outside stairs at number 19 Route 9, and she asked Lawson not to sleep there. He slept in his car in the lot behind the hospice for 9 nights, which the defense later tried to make sound sinister, and which the jury correctly understood as a man with nowhere else to go. On the 23rd of November, at 7:40 in the evening, Brady Poindexter climbed the outside stairs at number 19 Route 9 with a small padded envelope, put it under the door of an empty room, and came back down into a stairwell with 2 sheriff's deputies in it. Inside the envelope were 2 75-microgram fentanyl transdermal patches in a resealed pouch, and, because Brady was 30 years old and had never planned anything in his life, the pharmacy receipt from a walk-in clinic in Kentucky, in an envelope, in his own coat pocket. Brady talked for 40 minutes, and then asked for a lawyer, and then talked for another 2 hours. The thing about Brady Poindexter, that the jury understood, and that the newspapers never got right, is that he was not a criminal. He was a 30-year-old man who had been raised inside this, by this woman, since he was 13, and who had spent his entire adult life being told what to carry and where to put it. When Burkholtz asked him what he thought was in the envelope, he said, "And it is on the tape. I didn't ask." And she said, "Why not?" And he sat there for 11 seconds and then said, "Because I never ask." That is a whole life in 4 words. He told them about 2017. He had been 21 in 2017. He told them what his mother had said to him in a car outside a funeral home in Elizabethtown, and he cried when he said it, and the jury saw the tape. Hamlin Poindexter was exhumed in Greene County in March, 17 years in the ground, and the report came back inconclusive, which is the honest answer, and which the prosecution said out loud rather than dressing up. It did not matter as much as everyone feared. Farley Nightingale could not be exhumed at all. He was cremated 8 days after he died, which the state was allowed to point out. What convicted Eunice Pickerel was the 9th day. It was a woman who had been told, on the record, with certified copies in her hand, that there was nothing left to gain, and who spent $600 and a prepaid phone and her own son to do it anyway. The trial was 19 days, and I am not going to walk you through it, but there are two moments worth having. The first is that the defense's entire theory was that Lawson Barlowe had done this to himself. Not that he had tried to kill himself, that a hospice nurse in a collapsing marriage had diverted narcotics, been caught by his family, been thrown out, and had then constructed an elaborate frame to explain the missing patches and punish the people who had exposed him. It is a real theory. It is not a stupid theory. It accounts for almost everything, and for 2 days in the middle of that trial, watching it laid out by a competent defense attorney, Lawson said he could see the version of himself that everyone in that room might be about to believe in. What broke it was the irrevocable assignment. Because a man building a frame to punish his wife does not, a month before the attempt he is supposedly staging, permanently sign away $750,000 to a charity in front of a notary. There is no story in which that is the behavior of a person constructing a fiction, and the prosecutor said exactly that, twice, and the second time she said it slowly. The second moment is Juniper, who did not testify in the courtroom. Her recorded interview was played, 26 minutes with a trained forensic interviewer, 5 days after the driveway, with no leading questions, and the two boxes shuffling motion happens at 40 seconds and again, unprompted, at 19. The defense's cross of the interviewer took about 40 minutes and did not go well for them. And the reason it did not go well is that the child had described a thing she had no framework for. She did not say Grandma was swapping the patches. She did not know what a patch was for. She said Grandma had 2 boxes and did this, and she said Grandma told her not to tell, and she said she told anyway. She was convicted of attempted aggravated murder, conspiracy, and 2 counts of corrupting another with drugs. She was 65 at sentencing, and she got 26 years. And she read a statement to the court in which she talked for a long time about her lungs. Marley Barlowe was the hard part, and I am not going to smooth it over. She knew about the money. She knew about the locks, and the bags, and the shoes. The jury acquitted her on the attempt and convicted her on conspiracy, and she got 9 years, and she has never, in any statement, in any interview, in any letter, said that she knew what was in that box. Lawson has decided he does not know. He has said so publicly, which cost him something with people who wanted a cleaner story. Brady Poindexter got 7 years and testified. Gentry Hodgins, the insurance agent, was not charged and did nothing wrong and has, I am told, changed how he does one small thing in every kitchen he sits down in. And there was one more thing in that house, which almost nobody who followed the case noticed. In the basement, since June, there had been a family. Deshaun Monteith, 41, and his 2 kids, who had an eviction on record from a bad year and could not pass a screening anywhere in the county. Eunice had taken $2,600 in cash from that man for a room in a house she did not own, and he had been paying her $300 a month since, and he had no lease and no idea whose name was on anything. When Lawson got his house back in February, he did not evict them. He drove over, sat down at his own kitchen table with a man he had never properly met, and wrote a real lease at the same rent. He has said that this was not generosity. He has said it was the only thing in the whole affair he got to decide for himself. Last spring, the front room at Garriott Street had a bed in it again. Not that bed. That bed went back to the supplier in December, and the oxygen concentrator went with it, and the tubing went in a bag to the county hazardous drop-off, and Lawson opened every window in the house on a 39-degree day in January, and left them open for most of a day until the place was so cold the pipes complained. The smell went. It takes a month or so, and then one day you walk in, and it is a room. There are drawings taped to the wall in there now, at the exact height a 7-year-old can reach, and they are not Junipers. They belong to the younger Monteith girl, and there are 11 of them, and one is of a house with too many windows. So, the thing I actually want to leave you with. We say people are used. It is a soft word, and we use it about the wrong things, about somebody who bought the drinks, or somebody who did all the driving. What happened to Lawson Barlowe is the hard version of it, and the hard version has a specific shape. Somebody looked at a man and calculated a number, and after that everything they did to him, the warmth, the closeness, the front room, the arm around the shoulder in September, the 7 documents on the kitchen table, was work performed in service of that number. And here is the part that I think is genuinely useful. And it is the only piece of advice in this whole story that I would actually hand to another person. He did not find out what he was to those two women by asking, or by arguing, or by catching anybody. He found out by taking the number away. That is available to almost nobody in the dramatic form he used it in. But there is a small version of it in every life, and it looks like this. What happens the first time you are inconvenient? What happens the first time you cannot do the favor, cannot lend it, cannot cover the shift, cannot be the one who drives? Some people barely notice. Some people are a little disappointed, and then they are fine, because they liked you, and the favor was incidental. And some people go strange in a way you will feel in your stomach before you can name it. You are not being cynical when you notice that. You are reading, the way he reads a house. Lawson works nights. He is still at the same hospice, 7 on to 7 off, and he still finishes the shift. Juniper is 8. She knows the outline, and she will get the rest of it when she is old enough to hold it. And one of the reasons she is doing as well as she is, according to the people whose job it is to assess that, is that she has never once been told that what she did on that driveway was anything other than exactly right. She asked him, a while ago, whether he was mad that she told. I'm Nathan,